The Count and the Wedding Guest. Andy Donovan was a boarder at Mrs. Scott's boarding house. One evening he came to dinner and Mrs. Scott introduced him to a new boarder, a young girl, Miss Conway. Miss Conway was small and quite simple. She wore a plain brown dress. After the introduction, she did not speak to Andy Donovan. She was sitting looking at her plate and he forgot Miss Conway almost at once. 2 weeks later, Andy was sitting on the front steps of the boarding house smoking a cigar. Suddenly somebody came out. He turned his head and his head turned. Miss Conway was coming out of the door. She wore a beautiful black dress and a beautiful black hat. Her shoes and her gloves were black too. Her rich golden hair and her large gray eyes made her almost beautiful. She stood looking about the houses across the street up into the sky. Her eyes were very sad. All in black, and that sad faraway look, and the golden hair shining under the black veil. Oh, Mr. Donovan threw away his unfinished cigar. "Oh, it's a fine, clear evening, Miss Conway," he said. "Yes, it is," answered Miss Conway, "but not for me, Mr. Donovan." "Oh, I hope none of your family is," said Andy. Miss Conway was silent. At last she said, "Not my family. Death has taken from me somebody who was very, very dear to me. Now I am alone in the whole world, so I have no friends in this city." Andy Donovan did not ask any more questions, and their conversation came to an end. The more Andy thought of Miss Conway, the more he was sorry for her. Once he said to her at table, "It's hard to be alone in New York. You should go out sometimes to forget your trouble. Do you wish to take a walk in the park, Miss Conway, if you allow me?" "Oh, thank you, Mr. Donovan," said Miss Conway. "I shall be very glad to have your company. You're very kind." While walking in the park, Miss Conway told Andy her sad story. His name was Fernando Mazzini, and he was an Italian count. He had a lot of land, a villa in Italy. We were going to get married next spring. Fernando went to Italy to make his villa ready for us. After he left, I came to New York to get a job. 3 days ago, I received a letter from Italy. It says that Fernando is dead. He was killed in a gondola accident. That's why I'm wearing black. That's why I'm always sad. I can't take an interest in anybody now. If you wish, I walk back to the house, Mr. Donovan. Let's go back." But Andy Donovan did not wish to walk back to the house. "I'm very sorry," he said softly. "Now, we won't go back to the house, not yet. And don't say that you have no friends in this city, Miss Conway. I'm very, very sorry for you, and you must believe that I am your friend. I have a small photograph of him with me," said Miss Conway. "I have never shown you to anybody, but I will show it to you, Mr. Donovan, because I believe that you are my friend." Mr. Donovan looked at the photograph with much interest and for a long time. The face of Count Mazzini was an interesting one. It was a clever face of a strong man. "I have a larger photo of him in my room," said Miss Conway. "When you get back to the house, I'll show it to you. I look at it many times in a day. Well, he will always be present in my heart." Once they came into the hall of a boarding house, she ran up to her room and brought down a big photograph of the dead man. "A fine-looking man," said Donovan. "I like his face very much. Miss Conway, may I ask you to come to the theater with me next Sunday?" A month later, they told Mrs. Scott that they were going to get married. But in spite of this, Miss Conway continued to wear black. One evening, Mr. Donovan and Miss Conway were sitting in the park. It was a fine, clear night. The moon shone brightly in the green leaves. Everything around was now so beautiful. But Donovan was silent. He had been so silent all day that Miss Conway at last decided to ask him a question. "What's the matter, Andy?" "Nothing, Maggie." "But you never looked so unhappy before. What is it?" "It's nothing, Maggie." "I want to know, Andy. I'm sure you're thinking about some other girl. Well, why don't you go to her if you love her? Take your arm away, please." "All right, I'll tell you," said Andy. "I have a friend. His name is Michael Sullivan. Do you know him?" "No, I don't," said Maggie, "and I don't want to know him if you're so unhappy because of him." "He's a very good friend of mine, Maggie," continued Andy. "I saw him yesterday, and I told him I was going to get married in 2 weeks. Andy, he says, well, I want to be present at your wedding. Send me an invitation and I will come." "Well, why don't you invite him if he wants to come so much?" said Maggie. "There is a reason why I cannot invite him," said Andy sadly. "There is a reason why he must not be present at our wedding. Don't ask me any more questions now because I cannot answer them." You must tell me everything," said Maggie. "All right," answered Andy. "Maggie, do you love me as much as you loved your Count Mazzini?" He waited a long time, but Maggie did not answer. Suddenly she turned to him and began to cry. There, repeated Andy. "Oh, what's the matter now? What are you crying?" "Andy," said Maggie at last, "I have lied to you, and you will never marry me now. You will never love me any more. But I feel that I must tell you everything. Andy, there was no count in my life. There was nobody who loved me in all my life. All the other girls always talked about love and marriage, but nobody loved me. Nobody wanted to marry me. So at last I thought of a plan. I went to a photographer and bought that big photo which I showed you. He also made a small one for me. Then I invented this story about the Count and about the gondola accident so I could wear black. I look well in black, you know it. But nobody can love me. Liar. Nobody can love a liar. And you will now leave me, Andy. I'm sure you will leave me, and I shall die for shame. You are the only man I loved in all my life. That's all now." But instead of leaving her, Andy put his arms around her and looked into her face. She looked up and saw how happy he was. "Can you forget it, Andy?" she asked. "Of course I can," said Andy. "I'm glad you have told me everything, Maggie." They were silent for some time, then Maggie said, "Andy, did you believe all that story about the Count?" "Well, not at all," said Andy, "because the photograph you showed to me, well, it's the photograph of my dear friend, Michael Sullivan."